Hi, my name is Mark Levitt, and today I'm going to begin to read the third and final book in the Enlightenment trilogy. The book is titled A Triunistic Model of Reality, What It Is, Does, and Manifests As. I'm going to start today by reading the introduction titled It, and then chapter 1, 2, and 3 will be titled Is, Do, and As, and the conclusions will be titled So. So I haven't put it together, but when I do, this will be what the table of contents looks like. All right, so we start with It. As we find our way through the 2020s, the subject of spiritual enlightenment is gaining a foothold in popular culture, but at the same time, it is enshrouded in as much mystery as before the times of Buddha and Christ. This third and final book of the Enlightenment trilogy is my attempt to demystify the subject of the much sought after enlightenment, if ever so slightly. I'm not writing from the perspective of an academic, but more of a journalist of my own experience. I am just an everyday working class family guy with no current or past affiliation to any teacher or religion. While earning a degree in psychology and philosophy, I was beset with many questions regarding the true nature of reality and our place in it. In an effort to rely more on a personal experience in my personal quest for ultimate truth, I took up the practice of meditation or self-inquiry and unwittingly entered the path to spiritual enlightenment. I would take up many other practices along my decade search for the great secret to the universe. Some of the practices would include brain hemispheric synchronization technologies from the Monroe Institute, Salvia Divinorum, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, etc. But what all of these practices have in common is that they are all forms of self-examination. As I described in my first book, when you look to understand reality, you find that there is no other way than to examine yourself, the very idea of a looker itself. So I kept meticulous journals detailing the day-to-day, month-to-month, and year-to-year unfolding of the self in great detail. My first book, Enlightenment Behind the Scenes, is a very personal account of an incredibly impersonal process, broken down by step by step, and presented to the reader almost in slow motion. My story of enlightenment centers on 4 life-altering visions that spontaneously occurred while I was living out my day-to-day life. Until that time, I had never experienced anything remotely out of the ordinary. It was only after my repeated visit to the world-renowned Monroe Institute that things began to take a dramatic turn. After returning home from a week-long meditation retreat at the Monroe Institute, I detailed in the first book how I would find myself spontaneously thrust into a vastly more expansive perspective, which placed the entire world in a wholly new context. These visions were progressive in nature as they clearly and pointedly demonstrated the grand design of reality. So I outline a play-by-play account of how these 4 visions shaped a new understanding regarding the true architecture of reality and how this understanding resolves one of our greatest philosophical paradoxes, the relationship between mind and matter, or God and the world. And it's worth pointing out here and now that what I infer by the word God is simply the supreme source of everything. Whatever is the source for that reality, or for the reality that we all enjoy, has earned the title of God by definition. Whether that source is a man in the sky, a strange particle, or let's say the activity of humor. If any of these things or processes turn out to be the supreme source of reality, then they are by definition God. It is my observations, as outlined in Book 1, that have led to awareness as being the only possible candidate for fitting the criteria of being the supreme source of everything that can or will ever appear. It has been my experience from talking to various people throughout time that we do not see God as God actually is, but rather as we are ourselves. So, if you see yourself as a person or a thinking thing, or as a thing at all, then you will naturally and unavoidably project that idea or image onto your view of everything, every view, including of what God is. But if you see yourself as simply awareness or space, then you will also naturally and unavoidably see God as simply awareness or space. Because most of those that you meet day to day mistake themselves to being only individuals on a dirt rock floating through outer space, it's quite understandable why the idea of God has been personified over the centuries. But we are all adults here, so I expect that for the rest of this book, when I mention the word God, that the reader understands that God simply denotes the impersonal supreme source of reality, whatever that may be. It is obviously my contention that the supreme source of reality is aware space, for the lack of a better word. It is also obvious that my voice is only one of many that are pointing out this more matured and self-actualizing view of reality. Mysticism has been the long-standing tradition of investigating the supreme source by directly engaging reality. The current trend is to call the subject non-duality, or not two, which infers that there is only God, or more specifically, only awareness. The implication being that the entire universe, along with its inhabitants, is actually none other than God or awareness manifesting as the world of appearances. I find it interesting to point out that prior to the word non-duality, the popular buzzword associated with the subject of spiritual enlightenment was oneness. Of course, the view that the entire world is a manifestation of God or awareness has a long history in all major religions, generally referred to as the perennial teachings. What I have noticed is an evolutionary flow that dictates that our understanding is becoming ever more nuanced, taking us from oneness to the non-dual to the triunistic perspective. And just like non-duality encompasses oneness, instead of contradicting it, a triunistic perspective likewise encompasses non-duality and does not contradict it. The triunistic model of reality is simply a refinement, a further refinement, or a further elaboration on the same truth that oneness and non-duality are pointing to. Just as non-duality was a refinement of our prior understanding, previously referred to as oneness, for decades, oneness was the mainstream understanding of the perennial teachings. After some time, as our understanding matured, we refined our understanding of these teachings, and the word non-dual naturally became the buzzword since it was much more nuanced than the previous word oneness. If oneness was a message that we are all connected, the non-duality was a message that there is no we, and that there is only this, aware space. What the triunistic perspective brings to the conversation is specifically how the one, let me start that over. What the Triunistic perspective brings to the conversation is specifically the how and the why we were all one, and specifically how and why the relationship between man and the world, or even man and God, is non-dual in nature. The concept of the triunity is also found in all major religions as a means to describe the multidimensional aspect of the one, or God. I maintain that the mystery of our relationship to God is revealed in this triunistic model of reality. Whereas the current teachings in non-duality simply assert that everything is God or awareness, in this book, I will clearly outline and explain for the first time in lay terms how a triunistic perspective of reality explains the natural mechanism that ensures that God, or awareness, manifest as the world, as we all know as home. All three books in the Enlightenment trilogy are about the same subject of aware space being the actual supreme source of reality. But each book is a steady progression towards understanding the triunistic model of reality and has a different emphasis. What I mean is each book has a different emphasis on the triunistic model of reality. So there will be much talk about it, which refers to the supreme source or aware space. I will talk about what it is, what it does, and what it manifests as. I prefer to refer to it as aware space, but I'm also fine with the word God as long as the word is not personified. The emphasis of book one was that this is it, this, meaning that the entire world that you see and experience is actually the very supreme source that you seek. However, it, as well as the world that appears, is actually just misunderstood or misperceived as being otherness or being outside of you. The operative word in the first book is this, since I want to draw your attention to it being this experience right here and now. The emphasis of the second book was that it is and it isn't simultaneously, meaning that the very nature of it is paradoxical in nature, at least from the dualistic perspective. There is nothing you can equivocally say about it that isn't a contradiction on its face. Every truth that can be uttered about it is at once true and false, depending upon your perspective. The operative word here is and. It is and it isn't simultaneously. Lastly, the emphasis of the third book and the final book of the trilogy is what it is, what it does, and what it appears as. Meaning that the singularity aspect of aware space, or God, expresses itself as a seamless triune of potential, processing, and emergence of that potential. The operative words here are the triunistic relationship between is, does, and as. I see this triune as a self-perpetuating continuum, and the goal of this book is to share this specific insight. So, before I move on to elaborating on the triunistic model of reality, allow me to expand on some of the main terms that I will be returning to throughout this book. First of all, what exactly do I mean by a triune? Conceptually, the triune itself sounds like a simple dynamic that refers to the union of three distinct components as a singularity. I recently researched several dictionaries for the definitions of a triune, but was left unimpressed as the dictionaries merely deflected by referring back to the Christian Trinity, or even worse, suggesting that a triune could be any groupings of three things, or one thing having three parts. This, for me, is just more evidence that we, as students of life, have missed the most obvious clue to the actual architecture of both individuated beings and the totality of reality itself. There's ample evidence that the world religions were once aware of the triunistic model of reality simply because the actual scriptures of all the main religions outright claim to be a triune, or a trinity, or a trichia, or a trimurti, or a three-in-one, etc., which are all examples of a triune. Today, when you try and research any of these examples of the triune, you will not find very much, as this very topic is virtually non-existent in a world that is otherwise blossoming with wisdom regarding everything from non-duality to theoretical physics. And the reason that I have been one-pointedly obsessed with the triune for the last 2 decades is because I see it as the bridge that reveals in extraordinary detail the union of all natural studies, including the physical sciences, the mystical traditions, or direct self-examination itself. As I mentioned in my first book, I discovered the concept of the triune as I was struggling to understand with perfect clarity just how the one, or more correctly, the singular, manifest as the many. This has never been explained to my satisfaction because every attempt that I've ever heard before either didn't bother to explain the very specifics of the how, or they demanded too many leaps of faith for me to be satisfied in any reasonable way. I was looking for the answer to the how of it all by constantly reflecting on how I could couple my own previous experiences of directly engaging with the infinite with the wisdom of the mystics that I was reading at the time. My own situation kept bringing me back to this repeated experience of folding or bending. I intuitively knew that this process of folding was responsible for mind manifesting as matter, or the one manifesting as many. But I could not translate my direct experiences into a linear explanation. That is, until I had an epiphany one day while observing an amazing rainbow. The epiphany was that the raindrops that were transforming the light into a rainbow were doing so by the process of bending the light. In this case, the particular type of bending is recognized as refraction. Witnessing this rainbow was like witnessing the miracle of not just life, but the very act of creation itself. The whole story of our lives and the totality of reality itself was right there in the rainbow, on show for us all this whole time. So just picture the following in your mind to help you get a glimpse into my epiphany about the how of it all. So we will start with light as a metaphor for the one. With regards to the light, the rainbow only exists within the light as potential. Likewise, the many only exist within the one as potential. It is the bending of that light that transforms the light into the rainbow, just as it is the bending of the one that transforms the one into the many. Yes, that's it. That's the whole story right there. But not quite. Actually, not even close. This epiphany was only the beginning, as it just served to remind me of another symbol that I read about in a Buddhist book called a roball. I thought of the row ball because the rainbow made me wish that there was a symbol where the sun or light source emanated as the rainbow itself. And that is what the row ball actually looks like. But I'm pretty sure the row ball is just theoretical, because what it is a crystal ball that somehow contains a self-illumined rainbow within the ball itself. And it was the thought of that row ball that reminded me of the concept of the Trikaya that was described in the same book. I had read that book before, and it was a very influential book. However, it was only by revisiting the Trikaya, coupled with my experiences regarding the bending, attraction, and the void, that I truly appreciated the powerful model of the Trikaya as a model for the entire whole of reality. Once I intuitively got the Trikaya, I saw it as the basic design of everything in existence, from the micro to the macro, the internal to the external, the manifest to the unmanifest. As the years went by, I would notice it more and more in nature, society, culture, science, religion, etc. That is why it is so shocking to me that I find virtually nothing of what I am about to share in this book on the World Wide Web. But I do encourage you to explore any example of a triune, despite the fact that whichever religion you examine, you're most likely to find very vague and archaic references to the triune that bear no resemblance to your actual experience. And that is actually a generous guess as to what you will find, as the most common description of the triune that I could find was that it is an unsolvable mystery. The only book that I could recommend myself is the book that I referenced earlier, and that is called Wonders of the Natural Mind by Tenzin Wangyal. It is an academic book, so I will warn that it is written as such. And there are only 6 or so pages written specifically about the Trikaya, but like I said, there's very little out there unless you consider studying academic material at certain universities. Perhaps the most valuable lesson that I learned from that book was the structure of the triune. As I alluded to earlier, an actual triune does not refer to any given thing that simply has 3 attributes, even if the 3 attributes are all similar. In fact, it is not the specific quality of the attributes that make a triune, but rather the relationship between these attributes. Every example of a triune that I will outline in this book share multiple and identical dynamics. The first dynamic is described in the Trikaya principle as having 3 attributes that always express themselves as a unitive relationship between the base, the path, and the fruit. Or, to be a little bit more descriptive, we could say between the base, the path of that base, and the fruit of that base's path. That's the continuum. The base, path, and fruit specifically refer to the essence, action, and the result of that subject. So my point is that you can't just have 3 components of a triune if those 3 components do not have the specific relationship of being a base, a path, and a fruit. Another dynamic that I had to figure out for myself over many years was that not only was there necessarily a base, a path, and a fruit to any proper triune, but beyond having that specific relationship to one another, there is also a deeper nuance where it is always the inseparability or union of 2 that results in the third. And it is always the middle component, the path, that transforms the base into the fruit. I will outline this particular dynamic in great detail once we get to the appropriate chapter. I will illustrate how a proper triune is not merely any subject that has three closely related components, but instead a very specific relationship between three components where it is the union of two that emerge as the third. I will illustrate this point. I will illustrate this point by telling you a short story about how I was looking for examples of the triune in nature when I naturally looked to the brain to be an example of a triune, as the brain is as much as a perfect and natural symbol for life that you will ever find. So, after doing some research, I was not surprised to find a supposed triunistic model of the brain. But when I read the definition, I was not impressed. The triune brain theory, as it's called, is not a proper triune at all. It is, by its own admission, merely a theory regarding three independent minds. Now, that's a good start, but the reason it falls short of being an actual triune is that the relationship or activity between the three minds do not act as a triune, in that there is no union of the two emerging as the third. However, when I was researching this, I did come across another model of the brain that is triunistic in nature, and it doesn't even claim to be. The model was created and named the bicameral mind by Julian Jaynes. The idea is that there are two chambers of the brain. One side of the brain performs the actions, such as internal dialogue, while the other side of the brain receives the information. And it is the inseparable union of these two chambers that manifest as the emergent third component, which in this case is the experience of self-consciousness. This is their theory to explain self-consciousness. Now, I do not actually subscribe to this model, but I only bring it up to illustrate what an actual triunistic relationship looks like, as opposed to a model that actually claims to be a triunistic in nature. So let me finish by expanding just a little on some terms that I used as my chapter headings. When talking about the triune, we are always referring to what it is, what it does, and what it manifests as. So it's only fair that I let you know what I mean by these very simple yet powerful words. I already described it as being the totality of reality, supreme source, God, undifferentiated awareness, the unmanifest, potential, etc., etc. But strictly speaking, with regards to the triunistic relationship, the it refers to the subject of whatever triunistic dynamic you're describing. The is refers to the subject's mere presence. It's what it is, just it isness, it's isness. The fact of the subject's existence is the isness that I'm pointing to. To simply be is enough to possess the quality of isness. Depending upon the particular subject, the isness can even be as subtle or elusive as an unactualized potential. All right, so now we move to do. The do refers to the specific process of the base, what it does. The base always performs an action or follows a path. The doing of the base is what transforms the base into the fruit. This is the active side of infinity. The as refers to the base transformed into the fruit. The base is still there as a base, but the base manifests as the fruit. The as is what resolves the paradoxical relationship between mind and matter, or the supreme source and its creation. Actually, the as emasculates the concept of creation altogether, since it becomes evident that nothing is ever created, but rather transformed from its base. Then the new manifestation instantly becomes a new base of its own that will undergo a process that transforms it into a new fruit. And this dynamic plays out endlessly. What I would like to do before we get on with elaborating on the triune is to actually demonstrate for you how this triune is actually the very shape or design or architecture of our entire existence. It is the fundamental orientation of our entire perspective. You have been living as the triune your entire existence. So allow me to point out how you can verify this for yourself right now. So let us go beyond words and just take a direct look at what we find when we examine our actual situation that we all find ourselves in. When we stop the momentum of our lives to examine the basic design of our everyday experience, we will discover that without exception, we are naturally oriented in such a way that there will always be nothingness behind us in the world in front of us. So as I'm reading this, I'm going to go ahead and put up my picture of the black and white circle so you could visualize this as I'm talking to you. So let me go back and repeat that sentence. We're oriented in such a way that there will always be nothingness behind us, the world in front of us, in the sense of a self directly in the center of this junction between the world in front of us and the unmanifest behind us. You are the full triune itself right now. And you always have been. The fact that you experience all three of these dynamics of your entirety as one continuum is because of the unitive nature of the triune. The three aspects of the one are a continuum experience. The unmanifest behind you reveals the isness of your nature. This is what you actually are. The sense of an individuated self at the center of your experience demonstrates the doing or activity of your nature. This is what you do. And finally, the apperception of a world in front of you reflects the nature of the unmanifest to manifest as an appearance. This is the result of your triunistic nature and design. This is why I used the leaf pick in book 1 to illustrate how the one appears as many. All right, let's reorganize this. Put this back so we could lean. Okay, this is why I used the leaf pick in my book to describe the one in many. So let me get the leaf pick out. All right. Okay, so this is why I use the leaf pick in book 1 to illustrate how the one appears as many. In actuality, the leaf is one inseparable whole. But if the leaf were to bend or curl up into itself, even the slightest bend would cause the appearance of a shadow to obscure part of the leaf. This is our exact situation as pure, undifferentiated awareness, experiencing ourselves as a fragmented, limited beings cut off from the whole. So if the leaf itself represents what we actually are, which is pure, undifferentiated awareness, then the bending of the leaf or awareness represents what we actually do, which is to be magnetically attracted to that which we are aware of. And this fruit of attraction to itself is the resultant bended leaf, which now appears as differentiated or partially shadowed out. But in actuality, the leaf never stops being a leaf, despite the appearance of being differentiated. And that is what I mean by this. Despite the fact that appearances appear, it is never anything else but the void. It's always the void, just like the leaf is always the leaf. But when the leaf bends, it creates the appearance of two, a shadowed out half in the original. Same thing with the void. When it folds, it creates the appearance of manifestation, but it never stops being the void itself. That's what it actually is. So what it is the leaf. What it does is bend, and the resultant thing is the appearance of duality. And that's the world that we're all experiencing and that we've always experienced. All right. So, on to the next one. All right. We could look to the bended leaf as a metaphor for our own situations that we find ourselves in right now. When the leaf curls up, it takes the shadowed part of itself to be something else. When the leaf curls up, it takes the shadowed part of itself to be something else, since it doesn't appear the same as the rest of its being. This is what we do when we look at the world and we take it to be something else other than what it actually is, which is the void. Actually, the way I wrote that was, this is what we do when we look at the world and take it to be something other than what we are, simply because the world appears to be different than what we take ourselves to be. The only reason the world is referred to as an illusion by mystics is not because it is by its very nature an illusion. After all, things are just the way they are before we add our descriptions. It takes a thought to designate something as an illusion. So it is only if you mistake what you actually are to be the shadow or an appearance of self that you could be said to be living in illusion. Instead, if you recognize that the shadowed out part of the leaf is actually still the original leaf, despite the contrary appearance, then you would not be under any illusions about the reality that is being presented to you. So if you mistake that to be something other than that, then yes, you're living an illusion. But if you recognize that to be nothing other than that, then you're not living an illusion. You're seeing it as an appearance, not as the original thing. You're recognizing it for what it actually is, an appearance. To better illustrate how this dynamic is actually experienced throughout our everyday lives, I will line up a diagram of the famous light prism with a diagram of our basic default orientation and demonstrate how they are one and the same. All right, so now we're going to come to a picture. I had to draw myself, so it's going to look horrible. I'll have this professionally done when I print the book. But for now, you're going to have to deal with my crude artist rendering. All right, so let's look at the light prism lined up. All right. All right. To better illustrate this dynamic, is actually experienced throughout our daily lives, I will line up a diagram of the famous light prism with a diagram of our basic default orientation and demonstrate how they are one and the same. Okay. Our lives are like a triunistic continuum that is identical to the light prism diagram. All right. So let me go ahead and put this up as I read this. All right. So look at this. This is the diagram. And what I'm depicting here is how there's nothing behind us in the world in front of us. And I shaped the borderline as a person to give the sense of a self, to create the sense of a self. What I want you to pay attention to, though, is to see how I lined up the undifferentiated, or the unknown, the void, with the undifferentiated light, the bending of the light and the folding of the self, resulting in the appearance of a world, and the folding of the light resulting in the appearance of color. I'm trying to show you the relationship, and how also nothingness, the void, is always behind us. We're the center and the world is always in front of us. It's exactly like the light prism, and the relationship is the same too, where the light never stops being light even though it's bent, just like the void or the unmanifest never stops being the void even though it's manifest. Its potential has emerged, but it never stopped being the void, just as the light never stopped being the rainbow. All right, so let me read this as I hold up these pictures. Our lives are a triunistic continuum that is identical to the light prism diagram. Looking at the comparison of the perfectly lined up pictures, we see to the far right of both pictures are the undifferentiated, or the origin, represented by the pure light in the top diagram, and pure unmanifest in the bottom diagram. To the far left, we see the manifest, or the appearance, represented by the full spectrum of colors in the top diagram, and the world in the bottom diagram. Directly in the center, we discover the activity, or the process that transforms the pure white light into appearing as a full spectrum of color, or transforming the unmanifest into appearing as the world. If we further explore the very nature of the center of both diagrams, we will discover that in both cases, the actionable center is a bending of sorts. The bending of light into color is what scientists call refraction of light, and likewise, the bending of light into duality is what I call folding of awareness. The result of the bended or refracted light is an emergent full spectrum of color that, despite its lack of inherent existence, magically and miraculously obscures the original undifferentiated light that actually and inherently does exist. Likewise, the result of bending or folded awareness is an emergent world. In this apparent world, despite its lack of inherent existence, magically and miraculously obscures the original undifferentiated aware space that actually does exist. So, we as individuals do not even exist in the strictest sense, because what an individual actually is a mere activity or a processing rather than an actual thing itself. Specifically, individuals are the process of or activity that transforms the potential or the unmanifest to emerge as the resultant actualized world. But you, the reader, are not merely an individual. Instead, you are a perfect triunity of being something here in the center, nothing as you are behind you, and everything as the world in front of you, all simultaneously. You are a perfect triunity right now. Nothing, something, and everything. This is your experience. This very moment is a perfect display that clearly demonstrates just how you are all at once a full triunity of being simultaneously nothing behind you, something, center of your experience, and everything in front of you. Our lives are a seamless continuum uniting that which only appeared to be separate in the first place. We, as individualized processes, are that uniting factor between heaven and earth, or mind and matter. It is the activity of the center dynamic that determines whether the potential unmanifest emerges as actuality or not. When the center of our experience is recognized to be a mere activity or a process, rather than a substantial, graspable thing, the sense of being an individual yields to a sense of being the entire world. It is only by discovering your total lack of any existence whatsoever that reveals that there is also nothing that you are not. I created the picture of the world being inside the Buddha, as I pictured here in book 1. I created this picture of the Buddha with the world inside of him to try to convey the sense that you are the space for the world, that everything that you see is contained inside of you. That is your experience right now, whether you realize it or not. You are nothing but the space for everything that you're seeing, including these words. So I created the picture of the world inside the Buddha to try to communicate what it is like for you to see the world as you. Just like, whatever. All right. What I was trying to convey with this picture is an actual physical sensation that the world is actually inside of you. Of course, what I mean by inside of you is, again, a pointer that what you actually are is aware space. And within this aware space, the appearance of a world arises, and that world is recognized to be none other than a single emergent property of your full potential being actualized. You can back up your attention right now to verify for yourself that you are indeed the very aware space for every object that arises in your existence. The easy and obvious part is to recognize that the world is in you as you take notice that you are indeed aware space. If you continue to back up your attention, you will then notice that your body also exists in you. You see that your body exists in you. As aware space. Now, you can back up your attention even further to the next rung, where you will notice how even your thoughts are arising in you. You could perceive them. You witness your thoughts. They're happening in you as aware space. And as you continue to back up to the farthest rung back, you will discover the subtlest sense of an agency. I view this sense of an agency to be an outward expression of the original aware space having the quality of isness or being. While aware space actually does have the quality of isness, the emergent mirrored copy that we know as the sense of agency or self only has the appearance of actual isness. The tiniest bit of inspection reveals that the sense of an agency is just a wispy yet active tension Because remember, the self is revealed to just be a crease. It's not the thing itself. The paper is the thing itself. The crease is not a separate thing. It's not the paper itself. It's just a crease. It's an activity. It's a process of the paper. Okay, so now let's move on to the actual isness at hand. But before we move on, I want to end each section with a summation of all examples of a triune mentioned in that particular section. So we can see them all lined up together, revealing the far-reaching implications of the triunistic model of reality. So that chapter is done, or section is done. I'm calling that a section. I'm not actually calling that one a chapter. All right. So at the end of each section, I'm going to review all the triunes that were mentioned in this particular talk. So I'll put it here for a second, and then I'll just go over it. All right. So after each section, I'm going to have the base, path, and fruit, as that is the most general description of the triune. And under each, we're going to see the base, several examples of a base, several examples of the base's path, and further examples of the base's fruit. So we'll start with essence, action, and result. That one actually comes from the actual teachings of the Trilogy principle. That is how in Bon or Dzogchen, they actually describe or define the base, path, and the fruit. The base is the essence of what it is, the path is the action of what it is, and the fruit is the result. So that is the actual authentic Trilogy. Everything else in the book is just going to be my interpretation or my vision of it. All right, so the second example of a triune that we have is, as, and does. That's what it is, as, and does. So basically, any subject that we have, any base is going to have an isness, a path. Oh, actually, I transposed these. Path, I'm going to switch that. The path is does, and the fruit is as. I don't know how I messed that up. That will be corrected. Okay. The next one is potential, processing, and emergence. What I mean by that is that the base is always just pure potential, unmanifest. The path of that potential is the process, the action, some type of action. And the result, the fruit, is the emergence of that potential. The next one, we have the sunlight bending into the rainbow. So we have the sunlight as the source, as the base. The bending of that light results in sunlight appearing as a rainbow. Okay, just like potential appears as emergence, the sunlight appears as a rainbow because of the bending. Same thing with light. Light is what it is. The refraction of light through the prism results in the full color spectrum. So it's light appearing as the full color spectrum. Nothing, something, and everything. So we have nothing, which is behind us, the unmanifest, but the introduction of something, which in this case is the fold, which is us, results in the fruit, which is everything. Basically, you could look at nothing as being the undifferentiated, and something is any differentiation whatsoever. Any tension, any differentiation whatsoever of the undifferentiated transforms the undifferentiated into a you in a world. So you either got the undifferentiated, just nothing, or like a pebble in the water, boom, the whole still water disappears and all you see is ripples and waves. But the water's still the water. That's the important part. That's the most important part. The water never stops being water despite the appearance of the waves. All right. So now we have the unmanifest, the sense of self, and the world. I think I just explained that. There's the unmanifest. It's the sense of self that creates the world. So the self and the world always appear together. That's the thing. You're never going to have a self without a world. A self implies you thinking that there's two, the you and something else. You can't have a self if you don't have a sense of another. All right. The next one that we used was the left brain and the right brain in consciousness. Again, I don't subscribe to the idea of the bicameral mind, but I like it because it is an actual triune. Whether it's the theory is true or not, I don't know. But as a triune, it's perfect. You have the left brain doing the doing, the right brain being the receiving. In the inseparability of those two, the union emerges as what we experience as self-consciousness. Again, I don't necessarily believe that. It's not my area. It's not my area of expertise. All right, the final one is the leaf, the curl, and the shadowed leaf. You have the leaf, you have the original. The doing, the path of the leaf is to curl, is to bend, and as it bends, it's going to shadow out or obstruct part of itself. And if you take this duality to be actual, you're going to be living an illusion. But if you recognize it to just be the leaf itself, you're not living an illusion. You're seeing reality as it is. All right, folks, so that's it. That is the first section of, what is this? A triunistic model of reality. What it is, what it does, and what it appears as. So we're done with this. Next week I'll have chapter 1, which is called Is. And I'd just like to say, I read this to my wife and she noted to me that it was very academic. It was very kind of dry and very like I'm writing to a professor. This is the only book that's going to be like that. After I'm done with this, I'll go back to, talking about the more grounded things in life, suffering or actual experience of reality. But as you know before, this book was extremely important for me. I stopped writing for 10 years, or stopped doing anything for 10 years, because I was more interested in this than the books that I actually wrote. So I'm very excited to have this, but I do apologize if it's dry, if it's pedantic, if it's repetitive, if it's too technical, if it's too cold and impersonal. It's actually, the purpose of this book is I want this book to find its way to scientists, to professionals, so they could apply this triunistic perspective to their areas of expertise, because I don't have areas of expertise in the most important things in life, all the sciences and everything. And I really think it's going to be beneficial to anybody that's studying reality on any level. So my excitement and purpose about this is just to share it with others, so they could incorporate that into their view and come up with things that will teach me, instruct us all. So again, I apologize that this book's probably going to be a little bit more technical, less personal than the others, but it's very important. And I think if you follow it and you go real slow, you'll get it too. Another thing I want to say is that if you have any questions along the way, if anything doesn't make sense, if you feel stymied on anything, please ask, because it should be very easy. If I could explain it right, if I could find the right words, this should be very easy. But I need you to tell me where you're having difficulties so I could find the better words. That's all I could think of for now. At some point, I should probably do a proper introduction, but I really wanted to get this out there. So that's it. That's one. We'll see you next week. I've already got everything done. So we'll see you here next week with chapter 1 on Is. Thanks again and have a great day. Bye-bye.